Hey guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 158th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. So what's kind of cool about this set of 90s classics is I get to knock out a good amount of the channel's most overdue West Coast legends, many of whom I've gotten comments asking about, which is pretty understandable. I easily could have discussed Eazy in my first 80s group, as well as his sophomore LP here in my first 90s set, and nobody would have blinked or thought it strange. I mean, Eazy was probably the very first gangsta rapper I really became a fan of when I think outside of the usual Snoop Dogg or NWA records you'll hear in passing growing up here in Cali. Boys in the Hood was the first G-Funk or even gangsta rap song I consciously became aware of and knew every word of, outside of Colors by Ice-T as I've mentioned before. But that was a slightly different era and not exactly G-Funk yet. Ice-T was more part of the foundation that was laid down before it that allowed G-Funk to be created. Eazy actually released the first studio solo album to come from any of the NWA members in 1988 with Eazy Does It, which came out a whole year before the DOC's classic debut No One Can Do It Better. However, DOC was already one of the most active artists in their inner circle, as him, Dr. Dre, and Ice Cube all show up a number of times on Eazy's debut, with Ice Cube really getting his big break as a ghostwriter through his penning of the smash hit Boys in the Hood, which of course would later feature Cube in a leading role for the John Singleton masterpiece of the same name. I mean, technically, Cuba Gooding Jr. was the lead in that movie, but Ice Cube as Doughboy was pretty much the secondary character. But the song Boys in the Hood is one of those classic gangsta rap tunes where pretty much everybody knows all the words, especially for the opening verse, and it's safe to say that it's the moment where multiple members of this supergroup realize just how much promise their vision for the West Coast actually had. However, I do want to touch on something that I mentioned in my recent upload for Tupac or Machiavelli's 7-Day Theory, which is the ongoing phenomenon of discount rap fans feeling the need to take a side for a beef that quite literally ended before most of them were born. The majority of the time, it's people who weren't even alive when Eazy-E passed, but can't resist exposing themselves as fake fans who just quote the same few lines that were disses about Snoop Dogg and act like they're actually doing something. It's super embarrassing as Snoop is pretty damn respectful whenever Eazy comes up, and he details the situation where he really had no choice but to stand against Eazy-E, considering not just his allegiance to Dr. Dre, but his debt to Suge Knight and Death Row Records in general. Anyone with a brain knows the worst thing Snoop could have done at this time was just turn around on those guys and side with Eazy. In reality, there's no actual criticism for Snoop in this situation. It really just comes off as if they just discovered Real Motherfucking G's a week ago. This was Eazy-E's second extended play release, which also doubled as the final project he would drop before his unfortunate death. However, when Eric formed Ruthless Records with Jerry Heller, he would directly have a hand in signing groups that would later become pretty legendary in their own right. For example, Above the Law or Bone Thugs and Harmony. And it definitely helps when you have gangsta rap pioneers like Cold 187um on your side, who actually pops up for a guest spot on here. While this is technically an EP, I felt it was such a dope and essential project to any NWA fan, and the previously mentioned diss track leveled at Dr. Dre is without a doubt one of the most scathing and ruthless lyrical attacks, especially for a former friend and business partner. Anyone who's versed and has done the knowledge on 90s hip hop is almost guaranteed to have Real Motherfucking G's as a top 5 or even top 3 diss track of all time, with one insanely iconic insult being, "You're like a kid, you found a pup and now you're dapper, but tell me where the fuck you found an anorexic rapper." Talking about who you gon' squabble with and who you'll shoot, you're only 60 pounds when you're wet and wearing boots. This powerhouse of a diss also included guest appearances from legends like BG Knockout and Gangsta Dresta, who both deliver equally vicious and memorable verses. The latter actually comes in after that Eazy bar I just read, where he steps in for a second to give us, "Damn E, they tried to fade you on Dre Day," where E then responds with, "But Dre Day only made Eazy's payday." Of course, referring to the Chronic, more specifically the next disc after Ice Cube raised the bar with No Vaseline, which changed the timeline of this back and forth, that being Dre and Snoop's Fuck with Dre Day and Everybody Celebrating. Eazy would be working on his second official album, which later ended up being repurposed into his first posthumous LP, when Dre Day came out and inspired E to completely redirect his attention to making a full diss project, where the majority of the songs are going at their intended two targets nonstop. He and the soldiers on his side of this verbal war put arguably the only real dent in Dr. Dre's near incomparable career through consistently lobbing the term studio gangsta in his direction, which didn't just help Eazy win the beef, it's something that stuck so hard that people still use the term online virtually any time this back and forth gets mentioned. Of course, probably the biggest reason this stuck more than any of the lines from Dre or Snoop is because Eazy, Dresta, and BG Knockout made it a point to draw attention to the fact that Dr. Dre got his start in the world-class Wreckin' Crew, which included outfits and lines that, much like other flamboyant, sequin-wearing acts of the 80s, didn't play too well when they tried to then transition into the harder gangster rap sound of the 90s. The thing is, I feel like any NWA fan is aware of where Dr. Dre got his start, and I always found it a tiny bit weird that Eazy insisted his issues with former collaborators only really existed with Dr. Dre and not MC Ren, Ice Cube, or DJ Yella, but ironically, Yella got his start in the exact same group Dre did. I also found it slightly counterintuitive to the street code that Eazy literally sued Dr. Dre and company. However, I think that's kinda outweighed by the fact he's one of the few people who didn't back down to the jelly spine bully that was Suge Knight. According to Jerry Heller, Eazy had a direct plan to go and take out Suge Knight himself, as he saw before anyone else exactly what type of person he was, and that one day he would become a giant problem for everyone involved. But of course, Jerry ultimately talked Eazy out of that, which is something he has admitted to regretting. Which honestly is the little addendum that makes me completely believe that story personally. Also, I'm not sure how much I've gotten into it on the channel, but basically I've always despised how Suge Knight is talked about because people genuinely act like he's some badass who would never fold to anyone, except for when he kept trying to threaten Akon and his family, trying to use his usual bully tactics to get a percentage of something he had nothing to do with. But Akon wouldn't fold, so eventually when Suge ran into him at a club and tried bullying him into getting his way, it didn't work, and he got laid out by Akon's bodyguard as he deserved. And then you know what he did? Turned around and sued them. But people seem to conveniently forget that because it doesn't fit with their preconceived notions of what a badass that guy was. Regardless, Eric Wright is someone who wouldn't back down from anyone that I know of, and the fact he's often remembered as the winner of this beef, despite it's on Dr. Dre coming in between The Chronic and Doggy Style, two of the most popular and successful albums in modern music history, is more than commendable. This LP didn't nearly have that type of sales or worldwide impact, but it showed how at the end of the day, Eazy-E was really more of a strategist than a lot of people would want to give him credit for. Really, the only slight disadvantage in this classic album to me is how the songs about Eazy having non-stop sex with just about every girl who was willing and able is kind of bittersweet to listen to in retrospect, knowing the ultimate outcome from this vice of his. But obviously that's not an actual fault of the music or even its content, but it may explain why you'll see me leave Gimme the Nut out of my tracks to recommend. Also due to a relatively short track listing forcing me to cut some pretty good songs off. For the instrumentals on here, there's a select but quality group of producers who have their hand in the mix, including DJ Yella, Cold 187um, Rhythm D, Dr. Jam, and Madness for Real. When it comes to featured MCs, outside of the ones I already named earlier, we get Cocaine and Dirty Red. For my three favorite songs off this moment in hip-hop history, I'd be remiss to leave out Real Motherfucking G's, even with how much I've already talked about it, and my other two picks would have to be Any Last Words and Still. And when it comes down to honorable mentions, I'm gonna shout out songs like It's On, Boys in the Hood G-Mix, and Down to the Last Roach. Thank you for watching my 158th video. Next time we have a pretty iconic New York duo who managed to make a massive splash through their 1997 debut. So keep an eye out for that upload, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite moments are off the final project to be released during this late icon's lifetime. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.
Who would do such a thing? Look, I stand in the flame of a feeling we call pain. Father's Day mug, little hand shaped the clay. Carrier planes flew overhead in pockets.